Hello and welcome to the Recovery Matters podcast from CCAR, the podcast where putting recovery first is always the goal. Here we present interviews, discussions, stories, and speeches to cultivate the understanding and acceptance of the power, hope, and healing of recovery from alcohol and other addictions. Here are your hosts, Phil and Sandy Valentine.
Sandy.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing most excellent.
Are you?
I am.
You know, we have a lot of guests on the podcast, and I'm always amazed that the stories we've been hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And someone impressed me with his story probably more than 20 years ago now? 20 years ago or so?
Well, yes, 20 years, but we probably didn't meet until like 15 years ago.
No. When were you first in the legislature? Because...
Probably in 2004, 2005.
Okay. Well, I got you. Yeah. Anyway, say hello to Greg Williams. Say hi. You say hi to Greg Williams.
Hey, Sandy.
I did.
Hey, Phil.
Greg, I mean, the things that you've accomplished in your recovery have been amazing so far, right? I'm just so proud to know you and so blessed that you're here. It's really a special treat for me. But oftentimes we know of the work you've done, and I'm sure you'll get into that and the work you're doing. But how did it all start? Where did you grow up? What was little Greg like?
That's Phil's favorite question.
I know.
Well, I'm living little Greg with my 8-year-old son right now. I'm starting to learn more about where it all began.
I can relate to that.
As a father, as a sober father, and watching little Greg grow up again. No, it's a pleasure and honor. It's CCAR and all the work that this organization has done, and under the leadership of both of you, through the years, it's been really incredible to watch and learn from. And my recovery journey started right here in Connecticut, and it started pretty bumpy, like most people. I started drinking and using drugs very young. Long before marijuana was legal in Connecticut, I started smoking and drinking at 12 or 13, and quickly led to pharmaceuticals and things like that. I grew up in a family that was in primary care medicine, and so pill popping and those kinds of philosophies, albeit I hadn't got my license yet, became part of my high school education. And
do you know why you started, or what it was about? Do you know why?
For me, there was certainly some anxieties and I was very short, and I always felt kind of like an outsider. And
you were very short.
Yes.
I've never heard you say that.
Extremely short.
Shorter than you are now?
Well, I was a lot. They were projecting.
What? Don't look at me like that.
They gave me growth hormone when I was like 10, 11, or 12. I was actually projected to be like really, really short. So I was really short when I was like 8, 9, 10, 11. And it spurred quite a bit of insecurities and whatnot in me. But I don't know that's exactly why I started. I think the truth is, at 12, 13, me and a couple of buddies got bored one night and stole some liquor from a parents' cabinet and drank it, and gin didn't taste very good and tasted like pine needles. But
so what year was that roughly? What year were you born?
I was 83.
So 95.
Yes.
So you're telling my story from like 1972, 71. I had the same story.
Yeah.
And except I wasn't short. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that would be hard to...
I was tall and skinny and got made fun of for that.
So yeah, and got sick, but somehow woke up the next day, and as many people in recovery will attest, it's something in me said, well, I like the way that made me feel, and I want to do that again. And I don't think I could articulate it or understand it or, realize it at that point. But as many adolescents do, and I've learned later in my life that the adolescent brain is pretty pliable. So whatever you put into your body during adolescence or younger is an exacerbated way to become addicted. So that's what happened to me. Is within 18 months of 14, 15, by the time I was 16, I was pretty heavily addicted to opioids and to marijuana and to other things. And
did your parents know at the time?
They kind of things started to get ugly about when I was 16. They probably were pretty ambivalent, and I hid it pretty well up until that point. But then money started missing out of their wallets, and stopped showing up to school all the time, and got caught doing things. And once I got my driver's license, I got into a bunch of car accidents and other things like that, and and law enforcement started getting involved. So, yeah, by the time that I was 16, they started to really realize, but it was maybe a little late at that point for them to recognize what was going on. But they tried, a bunch of different therapies, and then my senior year of high school, we tried like an outpatient thing for a little while. But
were you a good? I know you to be a very incredibly intelligent person. How are you at this time as a student? Were you a good student?
Well, yes, I was smart enough to like pass my classes. One thing that I pulled off was early acceptance to the University of Colorado at Boulder, the #1 party school in America.
And did you know that at the time? You did.
Yes, I knew that at the time, and I liked snowboarding, and I said, all my problems in my life are related to my family. Let me just move across the country, and I'll be fine. And go to the, so that was like November of my senior year, and I got in. Not the hardest school to get into, mind you, but I got in, and for the rest of my senior year, I don't remember much. It was a pretty much a blur because I had nothing to do at that point.
Lift your mic up just a bit, I think. There you go. Are you good, Travis? Okay, good.
So yeah, I didn't end up going out to the University of Colorado until I got into recovery a year, but the end of my senior year is where things started to really crash, where I had one night at a family affair, my parents couldn't wake me up, and then they brought me to a program the next day. I went to that program, and then they told me, you need more help, you got to go inpatient, and I told my parents, I'll be fine, I'll just go to college and I'll be fine. And a couple weeks later, I ended up in a near fatal car accident in July of 2001.
Yeah.
And woke up in Danbury Hospital ER, and got told, yeah.
Was that the jaws of life? Did they have to jaws of life you out of that, or was that somebody else?
No, that's not my story. My story is it was Friday night at 2 a.m, and I was in a blackout, and this kid, I guess, was driving my car and wrapped it around a tree, and then ultimately we left the car on the side of the road with blood on the inside, and we went to the center of town, and we were trying to sell drugs in the center of town, and got missing teeth and blood all over myself, and so in the police report, I've got, an imaginary cell phone and 2 different birth dates, and I'm just totally gone. And, and then they bring me to the scene of the accident, and my mom recounts the story that I was 17 still, and she had signed me out of a couple ambulances at this point. And I said, Mom, sign me out. And she said, not this time, and so they brought me to the hospital, and full well knowing that, I was probably going to be arrested, and the kind of stuff that we had on our person and in the car, I could do a lot of jail time for that stuff, for what we had. And so I woke up in the hospital, and my family conspired with the physicians and scared, everyone got scared and scared me that I was going to go to jail for a long time, unless it would be good look if I went inpatient. And so they sent me down to New Canaan, Connecticut for a locked unit at 17, the adolescent unit down there. I spent a few days there. They had a intervention with my sister, who was like, we'd rather you go to jail. At least we know where you are and you're safe. And I was like, fine, I'll go to the 28-day program and that you want me to go to, and then I'll go to college and I'll be rid of you guys. And so my dad drove me to Pennsylvania, and I showed up with missing teeth, and but for the first time I walked into a community of 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds that had lived what I had lived, had lived my experience of becoming addicted at that age. And they called me Fang because I had like one tooth, and I slowly but surely started to hear some stuff in that program. It was really a strong quality adolescent inpatient program. And
that would be a tremendous trail name. They hike the Appalachian Trail and be called the Fang, don't you think, Sandy?
Yes.
You do.
Well, let's go back to Pennsylvania.
So I then woke up, in this program, and woke up kind of mentally and emotionally after 10 days, and started to realize what was going on in my life, and the counselors really worked on me. And I had gotten into the University of Colorado, and I told the counselor, she's like, you think you're going to do 28 days here, and you're going to go to college and live at the #1 party school in the country and stay sober? And I said, yeah, no problem. And I believed myself. I would tell good lies, and I lies good enough that I would believe them.
Those are
very, very much. Yes.
True.
I don't even know some things, whether it was the truth or not, because I rehearsed my lie to really own it. Mm-hmm. That my memories are a little unsure.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's we can be convincing even to ourselves, right? And then this kid was like my roommate, and he was like, "Why don't you, get your life straight first? College will always be there." And I just had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that I was wrong, and this counselor was right, and he was right, and something bigger than me. And I ended up walking back into the counselor's office like 15 days into the program, and I said, that halfway house you're talking about, yeah, I think I'll do that, and I'll put school off. And that's kind of really the beginning of my recovery journey, was, taking some direction, taking some suggestions, and, starting to listen to the wisdom of others. And, I left and went to a 90-day program for men. I had just turned 18, and was living with many older men in a 90-day program in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in the woods of the hills of Pennsylvania. And it was there where I got introduced to the 12-step program, and started to really embrace the philosophy and the ideas of recovery. Mm-hmm. And I was able to get a job, and they came and picked me up at 5 a.m. and I shoveled mud for masons, who were building Staples, and it was unforgettable, but yet incredibly rewarding experience. Mm-hmm. And I'm really blessed to have gotten the ability to do, to have basically 4+ months of solid residential care.
Mm-hmm. You came back home, and after that?
So I left Pennsylvania after 4 months of recovery. I came back to Connecticut.
How are you feeling?
well, my life has changed. I've got all the answers, you know. If everybody just, you know, it was one of the stories is probably, you'll love this one, is it was like my third recovery support meeting. It was a big meeting, and this is in 2001 in a Catholic school gymnasium, right? So they're, of course, in Pennsylvania, they're still smoking at that time. You know, there's not many smoking meetings anymore, but there's like, you know, they're smoking like cigars and like, you know, baking out this Catholic school gym, and I'm like, what is going on? But I raised my hand in the middle of the meeting, and I'm like, hey, if we all just, you know, follow this program and we follow these steps and we do these things, you know, our lives will change. And I was like, I think I just saved some lives, right. You know, with what I said. And this older gentleman came over to me and he said, you know, hey, kid. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, you probably shouldn't share for a year. And ouch. And that was my introduction to, and I went back to the halfway house and I told this guy and I said, hey, you know what this guy told me? He said, you know, said I shouldn't share for a year and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, he listened to me rant, and then he was like, well, he's right. You know, you've got too many answers. You know, you need to listen. It was not an easy thing for me to do at the time. My defense mechanism, and this isn't necessarily a suggestion I give other people, different people are very different in this regard, but my defense mechanism when I first started recovery was like, if I'm talking or deflecting, then I'm not doing any work in myself. And if so, I had all the answers. I'm not internalizing anything. So if I've always got a comeback or response or, you know, all of that. So it was a helpful suggestion for me, and it helped me start to listen. And so, you know, in that regard, I came back to Connecticut and continued to listen. You know, there weren't a lot of young people. I mean, I was really young, and there was a couple, but, you know, I just kind of isolated, and I still was committed to going to the University of Colorado, and this was like the fall of 2001. It turned into 2002. I'm working at a car wash, you know, living at home, you know, just trying to put the pieces of my life back together, but things got better, and I became useful and helpful, and my parents redeveloped a relationship, you know, and I was still certainly a handful, I'm sure, but was able to hold a job, was able to live at home, and then in the summer of 2002, I'll never forget, they brought me out to Colorado. To bring me to college, and it was like that night they drop you off, and this is you know, on the number one party school in America, and this is like the place in Colorado, if you've ever seen the pictures on 420 when there's just clouds of smoke, you know, that come above the campus right outside the dorms. And I was very stubborn. I was like, no, I am not living in the drug and alcohol free dorms. There was no college recovery program or anything. But I was like, you know, I just want to live with normal kids and be a normal kid. And I had a lot of that energy in me. And so the first night I looked up this meeting in a book, and I went to this little back alley place, and 3 bus stops away, and I walk into this recovery support meeting in Boulder, Colorado, and there was like 5 people. There's 2 young people, and they said, hey, you got to go to campus group. And I was like, okay. They're like, yeah, it's at this church. I'm like, that's like 100 yards from my dorm. Yeah. And they're like, Tuesday and Thursday, you got to come. And so I walk in on a Tuesday night, and there's 250 young people on this college campus in the number one party school in America, across from the football stadium where they tailgate every Saturday. And they were on fire for recovery.
Yeah.
Rock climbing, snowboarding, just the energy of this group. It was kind of my introduction into youth recovery and the energy around young people's recovery across the country. And that really changed probably the trajectory of my experience, because up until that point I was kind of, you know, I was 18. I'm like, you know, recovery was important to me and it was a big deal, but like, was I having a lot of fun? I mean, I was kind of like sitting in my basement. Like, it was, you know, it was what it was. And so meeting all those people in Colorado and doing those things became really, really energizing. And so that I did that for a while and then came back to Connecticut.
It's just your timing of sharing that story is remarkable, because next weekend is move-in weekend at the university that I work at, and I have all these plans in place to support the students who I know are coming back, who are in recovery, because I've just heard countless stories already, just in the 3 years of working in this field, of students who got into recovery over the summer, and then it's within 2 weekends that it all falls apart for them. So the fact that you were able to land there and make that connection right away is what I hope for every student, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah, and it's and what happened to me was dumb luck. It had nothing to do with the University of Colorado, right? At that time.
Right.
Now they've got a great program and they're doing great things, but at that time it wasn't like this was part of the handbook. You know, my parents would have put that in front of me if there was a program, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's amazing, you know, that we have these structured recovery programs, because it's you know, now and you know, across these campuses, because there's so much energy in it.
Mm-hmm.
So how did 250 kids in recovery, how did they assemble in this place? What's the history of that meeting, or what is it? How did you find it? Because that seems pretty extraordinary to me.
Well,
is it extraordinary?
Not on a university campus of 40,000. I mean, you
so
know.
Do other campuses in your history have this type of recovery groups going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I you know, large campuses. I mean, if that's the community, I mean, you go down to Penn State, and
mm-hmm.
you know, I guarantee you, there's some big meetings with, you know, it's not, you know, so yeah, there's been a lot of. I mean, I don't know, like, Bill White would give you the more history of it, but like, I mean, youth recovery. I mean, what I know from an epidemiology standpoint is, you know, the 18 to 25 population is the highest rates of substance use disorder in this country, and so about 25% of all college kids have some sort of alcohol or drug problem. So those are the people with the problem, but there's certainly a significant portion of people who've resolved those problems or attempting to resolve those problems. And so, you know, there's it hasn't always been probably, you know, organized.
So what you're talking about is that usually it's a 12-step fellowship of some kind will get into a church basement or find a site, and they will start a meeting, and that's what happened in Colorado and other places. It's these fellowships or types of meetings start, and it's always about attraction, not promotion, right? So people like you found out, hey, you ought to come to this meeting, and you're saying, okay, this meeting's 5. You probably didn't know what you were going to walk into, and there were 200 people there.
Yeah.
That had to be like, oh, like my. Had you ever seen that many young people in recovery before?
Well, that's the key. Is young.
Right?
I mean, I had been to some meetings that were larger in Connecticut and stuff, and there were, you know, some meetings in my hometown and stuff were larger, but I'd never walked into a meeting with 200 people who mostly were under 20, 22, 25. I mean, it was
wow.
Yeah, I mean, that was because, you know, I think there's a part of, you know, there's a connection between two people who've experienced alcoholism or addiction, but there's an even deeper connection, the more specific that cultural experiences. And young people is a culture in and of itself, you know, and we, you know, it's like thinking about youth in recovery as sort of a subset, and those who are 18 to 25 are much closer to adolescence than they are to adulthood, most of us.
Yeah.
So I'm
still closer to adolescence, aren't I?
He ranges between 12 and 14 depending on the day.
Is that even adolescence?
Yeah, no, I know, I get you.
But yeah, and so then, you know, I came back to Connecticut on fire of youth recovery and started to do a lot of stuff around that, and the next couple of years I went to Quinnipiac in New Haven, or Hamden outside of New Haven, but you know, started to hang out.
So what made you decide to change schools?
I chased a girl back to Connecticut. Yeah.
Okay.
So, you know, it was the longtime girlfriend, and We had lived apart for a while in Colorado, and then I came back. It was also media production. I was interested in media production, and Colorado didn't have a good program, and Quinnipiac had a much better program. For media, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So so I came back, and then I lived in Naugatuck by myself in an apartment, because there was no support on campus. We had a little meeting that we set up at Quinnipiac, but went to mostly like New Haven supports and what have you, and slowly but surely got more and more interested in kind of like why insurance cards weren't working for people I was trying to help, why my friends were going to jail, why we were starting to see overdose rates really go up. This is still in the early 2000s as Oxy and other stuff started to really take hold. And so I started to kind of ask these questions and take a couple classes. And, one thing led to another. And at the time, the Department of Family and Children had something called the CCAR grant. And they, I don't even know what the acronym was, but they had a little money, and they were looking to engage young people and families in advocacy efforts around substance use. And I had made a little documentary for one of my classes about a young person in recovery who was like 16. And it sparked something in me that I had this unique access, given my own life experience, to these stories. And so I showed a couple people. One thing led to another, and I met Donna Alagata, who said, "Hey, would you want to make some of these films for the SAC grant that she was coordinating for the state, for the Department of Family and Children?" And it was that kind of journey, and I said sure. And so they funded the production of a couple short films for me, and during that experience is when I learned all about CCAR and the recovery movement, and yourself and Bob Savage, and the RCSP and all those things, and learned Bill White's name, and that's when Donna invited me up to the legislature to share my story, and it was the kind of the first experience of advocacy that I had was being able to share my story in front of state legislators.
Yeah, you're really passionate about our system. You always have been driven to change the system, and I think the first time you were really aggravated, and still are, passionate about people not getting the help they need, not being covered. Yeah,
well, I think it's covered on one sense, but covered in two senses, and so there's the coverage of access to care in general, and then of just any kind of treatment services, but coverage of the right services has always been the thing that has driven me, is what our systems purchase, or what our systems have funded historically. Doesn't exactly look like what I received. It doesn't look like what people in recovery ask for, what they need. It looks a lot like stuff that might have made sense in the 70s and 80s when we knew what we knew then. But sadly, we know a lot more now, and it means that we need to change, and we need to start to think more broadly and holistically about that, but also, learning about how intersectional, recovery is with community supports and things like that. So I've always been really interested in that. And then in Connecticut, I've always been frustrated by our bifurcated system with, we have children in one agency and then adults, and it's like, I'm a case example of, I turned 18 in rehab, and like nothing changed in my brain, but like a whole lot changed in terms of like what resources and system stuff. And it's, we have this illness that is a pediatric onset illness for 90% of the people, meaning 90% of the people are like me, who started using drugs and alcohol before they turned 18. And
That's me.
yeah. And so for us to create a system where we treat, people who might not be fully, classified as addicted yet, in an entirely separate and siloed place in the judicial budget, nonetheless, which is where we put foster care, not the healthcare budget. But then when you turn 18, then you move over to this other agency, and that other agency is disconnected from the Medicaid agency, which is disconnected from public health, which is it's just disconnected from the bureau, the prison system is disconnected from the housing system, and it's like this is all. It's all connected in our bodies and our communities and our lives, but we disconnect it by design in our systemic response, and so that's kind of what has motivated me to kind of stay involved and find pathways to break down some of these silos.
What would it look like? Like if it was all up to Greg, what would it look like?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be all up to Greg. What I've tried, long story short, I went on a journey to ask that question to people a lot wiser than I, and I, so most of what I speak about and articulate today has little to do with, my opinion or my thoughts, but what I've learned interviewing people who've been doing this work for many, many years. And in that main experience was I made a film called The Anonymous People that CCAR helped support, and Phil was one of my first interviews. And I would just go from person to person, and they would tell me I need to connect with this person, and I need to, and I'd came off 40 interviews of interviewing different people who had been doing this work for a long time, and it solidified for me kind of what needs to happen, and ultimately what needs to happen, and this is a means to an end. This isn't but the means to the end is that our systems have to finance wellness and incentivize wellness in a way that if you're a provider of children's mental health or addiction services, or an adult, addiction services, or you're a recovery community organization, wellness needs to be the North Star. And any funding that we have, whether that be government grants, contracts, or third-party reimbursements that we make to those agencies, needs to be tied to reaching that goal. And it kind of builds on what the state of Connecticut has talked about for a long time around recovery-oriented systems of care and all of that. But I think we have good language to articulate it. The problem is we haven't gone behind with the financing systems to create the institutionalizing of it, where wellness and recovery is the goal, and the providers along the journey haven't reorganized themselves accordingly to meet that goal.
Yeah. I know one of my observations, again, being totally new to this field over the last 3 years, is that when it does become an insurance transaction, or the family has money, it doesn't drive the best behavior with providers. And so, one of the things that I've appreciated about CCAR is their effort not to charge for their services to the recovery, or however you want to phrase them. And so I don't know how, I come from a for-profit corporate background, so I get all that, right? Even corporations started wellness programs, but it was to keep their health insurance premiums down that they were paying on behalf of employees. So they would drive these behaviors towards wellness and incentives towards wellness so that they could save the money on the insurance transaction. And so, a question that I certainly can't answer, maybe your experience has some insight, is how you establish a community of providers that aren't driven by profit, that are keeping folks and selling beds more than they're meeting a recovery where they're at.
Yeah, I'm certainly not a utopian individual. I'm a pretty pragmatic individual, and so your experience is exactly right. And I guess my interesting, counterpoint is like, well, if wellness saves the company money, and they're doing it to increase their profit margin, but wellness improves the lives of their employees, is that not a more effective form of capitalism, right? Like, is that not necessarily a step in the right direction? Like, yeah, it doesn't feel great that somebody would be profiting off of somebody else's healthcare, but that's the system that we have, right? We do not have government healthcare by and large for the vast majority of people, and so in the private sector, health outcomes, health wellness should benefit people who are funding the health system, and people should be incentivized to do those things. And so I do think that as long as we have the system that we have that finances healthcare through those ways, on the public side, it's there's not enough money to go around. We don't, if we keep paying for treatment the way we pay for treatment today, which is in these isolated experiences, these fragmented, isolated experiences. I had a former colleague who you look at the treatment gap in America, and it's like 18 million people. It's a $2 trillion problem, So like, if we just sent everybody who needed it to the guy, and not that it would even work, right? And so until we flip the incentive, this is how our systems are designed, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, it doesn't really matter. People organize themselves around what they can get paid for. Even in a nonprofit like CCAR, where you're providing services for free, there's still some level of sustainability element, right? And so you've been blessed that you've been funded in a way that you've organized to the system, like, this is how we want to deliver the services that CCAR funds, and that makes a whole lot of sense. I think the challenge that we have is we have not done that. We have not transformed that kind of financing system to the clinical service providers, to the criminal justice system, to these other kinds of entities. And so the work that I do today is a lot around how do you take these cross-sector financing streams, start to blend them together, and then try to change the incentive so that we can get to a more sustainable recovery-oriented system of care that's not just government grants, but it's tied into how the systems are financed through Medicaid increasingly, and how the systems are financed even in private insurance. And so it's not it's a complicated answer, but I guess I don't necessarily believe that the profit motive, if we can change where somebody's making money. And the reason I believe that is because my recovery, and I said this at the legislature 15 years ago, and it's still true, is my recovery is worth $250,000 up to $2.3 million to you all, the state legislature. My recovery is valuable to the state of Connecticut. My recovery is valuable to the United States of America. I've paid taxes for the last 15 years, right? So part of that stuff becomes quantifiable, and so somebody's benefiting from my recovery. The publicly funded or privately funded acute addiction treatment centers are not, because they're financed to only treat those people, but who need their service at that time. But there's a lot of beneficiaries.
That's a great point.
We always say too that we turn from a drain on society to a contributing citizen. Simply, when you're actively addicting, think of the havoc that you're creating out there in the world. When you get into recovery, you start to contribute. It's very simple. I think what I remember too, especially in your early stages of recovery and being at the legislature, is you talked often, very powerfully, and I think it was one of the reasons about the anonymous people the creation of the Anonymous People was how many people you had lost who had died, friends of yours. And I know that's a tough part for you, but talk a little bit about that. And I don't think it's changed much over the 15 years either. You've seen a lot of loss.
Yeah, it's, I think when I told the story about I started asking questions while I was in college, the first 6 years of my recovery, I went to 6 wakes of young people my age from my grade. And I have this vivid memory of like standing on the receiving lines. And when an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old dies in a community, there's long lines, there's the whole community comes out often, and you're standing there for 2 hours, and I just, the whispers on those receiving lines of, oh, he was a bad kid or bad family, and like, just the anger, it created quite a bit of anger in me around how misguided and how confused people were about what this was and what they didn't know, and all of that, and so those kinds of things fueled me, and I didn't know this until Stacia Murphy articulated it to me while I was interviewing, and she said advocacy is about anger.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I don't come across sometimes as an angry person, although I've pounded on my fair share of government tables, but it's that is, I'm angry. I'm angry at how we respond to this issue. I'm angry at how people discriminate against people like me. I'm angry about how misinterpreted this issue is, and part of that comes from some of my friends didn't need to die. They didn't need to get locked up. They didn't need to commit suicide. They didn't need to do those things, but our system, they didn't get as lucky as I did, and that's the bottom line. Is we had this old adage in the recovery world, or in the addiction treatment world, is you have to be ready to get it, and that whole thing to me is just it's a way to let everybody off the hook when the system fails.
Well, blame the person.
Exactly.
So, like, if somebody catches an early diagnosis of, say, cancer, it's heralded as like, how wonderful you were able to catch it early. You say the same thing about someone with an addiction, early warning sign. They go, well, what's wrong with that guy? Why didn't he just stop? Or why doesn't she just quit? Or we still have that. Yeah. The treatment plans coming out of the emergency departments, I've read them. They say stop using heroin. Yeah. That's your discharge plan.
That's the problem.
Well, thank you for telling me that. Stop using heroin. Do you have any ideas on how I might be able to stop, or can send me some? No, just stop using heroin.
Yeah. No, it's and the saddest part, I think, as we've seen this overdose crisis, is that the healthcare system is some of the most punitive.
Yes.
I got treated very different in the emergency department because my family knew people there and were in healthcare, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, if you're a friend or a relative of somebody who works in that emergency department or has some kind of connection, you might actually get great response. But if you are not in that small group of people who just by dumb luck are relational to the providers, it is one of the most punitive places to go as an individual, and so it's
with an addiction.
With an addiction, yeah. It's the wrong. Look, I don't necessarily blame ER physicians or ER nurses. I'm married to one, but it's the wrong place to be sending people in crisis for drug and alcohol services. Because you're sending them to a place that is not well equipped. They know what to do when your heart stops. They know what to do when you break your leg. But it's not about reaching somebody with the heart, and it's not about reaching somebody from a place of shared lived experience. And so it's amazing what you all have been able to do, kind of, to get into these ERs and try to transform the culture from inside. But, I'm a big proponent of trying to find ways to deflect people from criminal justice systems and emergency systems into more stabilizing.
Earlier.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
You'd be fascinated to know that at Hartford Hospital, we piloting a consultation liaison service, which basically means if you request a recovery coach on any floor in the hospital, besides the emergency department, we'll go. Cool. And our coaches love it. And in the first few months, the call volumes have like doubled, tripled, quadrupled, because people are, and the coaches like it more because it's not like the chaos of emergency room trying to broker a resource, get this person out into the next level of care, all that kind of stuff or whatever. People are there for 3, 4, 5, 6 days or longer, and they get to have ongoing conversations about recovery. And it's amazing how many people end up in different places in the hospital that have an addiction or issue of some kind. And,
well, I even think about you being in that hospital when he was going through cancer treatment, and the pain wasn't being able to be managed, and he's advocating for his recovery to minimize any medication. And if you had plenty of recovery coaches around you, but if someone similar to you could ask for a recovery coach to just be with them through those conversations and help them talk it through, it would be amazing.
Yeah. So one of the things that you've made quite the splash in the recovery community with your film, The Anonymous People. So talk to what was the inspiration? How did it turn out? What do you think about the results these years later? And did it do what you wanted it to do?
Yeah, I don't know what I wanted it to do. Just, one of the beauties of this journey is just one foot in front of the other, and trusting the process. I got frustrated with going up angry, going up to the legislature and being there, and going to meet with DCF and going to meet with DEMIS, and telling them hey, this is how the system should be, and this is how and they'd be like, well, you got to go to the legislature, and then you go, and the legislature would be, well how many people are in your organization? And it's you get into this circle of oh, okay, so this whole thing is about money or people power, and so this, if systemic transformation is what we need, and we live in a so-called democracy, you only have two options to change the system, and one is through people power, and the other is to pay it off. And so I didn't have the latter, so I had to attempt I had to think about ways to, how do you get the people, and you start to read Bill White's stuff around the new recovery advocacy movement, and the calls to action he was making in the 2000s and in 2010s, and I would try, at 22 years old, 23 years old, I'd be like, hey, Joe, Bob, you guys got to read this stuff, and they'd be like, this PhD, they're he's like, I'm a carpenter, I'm what do you, I'm doing construction, you want me to read a bill, and that wouldn't be the reaction, but they're like, what do you mean, you want me to read this dense research, not that it he's an incredible writer, right? But it is not the easiest stuff to interpret, understand, and if you didn't go to school for sociology, it's deep
and it's profound in a lot of ways too.
Right, and so that medium was incredibly influential to people who could access that medium. And I guess when I went to my first language training, where Tom Coder and Betty Courier were the trainers, and Pat Taylor had invited me, and I went, and for the first time they gave me this language as a person in long-term recovery. And I'm sitting in a room with 40 people, and I was like, these people need like a film made about them, you know. And I had seen some, you know, there was like The Inconvenient Truth, and there was a couple other movies about climate change or LGBT rights or the HIV movement, and I was like, we need a movie made about these people and what they're doing and fighting for parity and all this stuff. And so, you know, I kind of decided that I was gonna go get my master's degree, because Donna had told me that, hey, you're getting into this policy stuff, it's good if you've got some letters after your name. And I said, well, nobody in the film business ever asked me like where I went to school. They're like, show me your reel. You know, they don't want to know where you went to school. And she's like, yeah, but you're kind of into this policy thing. And so I was like, all right, fine. So I found this program at NYU where I could do an artistic thesis. And so I got into NYU, and I got into this program at Gallatin and to get my master's degree. And while I was getting my master's degree, I started to develop this construct for an artistic thesis, which was the anonymous people.
You know, my daughter went to the same school at Gallatin.
Oh, she did?
Yeah.
Awesome.
You might have been there together.
An artistic thesis or research?
No, it was, I don't remember, it was business or something.
Oh, no. She went there for undergrad.
But she went to the Gallatin school.
Yeah, it's small. It's a small community. It's really cool, eclectic group of people. But you got to know what you want to do, right? Like, and it's an interdisciplinary thing. And
she was doing economic development in third world countries.
Exactly. So I was doing social work, new media, and film, you know, so it's right next to Tisch, the film school. And so I would take classes in Tisch and in the social work school, and in, you know, and so I was like doing that. And the outcome, I had to write a little briefer thesis with an artistic component. And the outcome of my research thesis was like, we need a system transformation. And how do you get there? Well, the arts can be one vehicle to change hearts and minds. And so that was kind of the logic to developing that. And so I started to shoot these interviews, and I borrowed some money from my family, and I said, I've got this idea, I want to go out, you know, and they let, you know, so they gave me a head start, and I started shooting these interviews with Craig Mkhitaryan and Bud Mkhitaryan, and we drove around in my mom's Honda Pilot for the better part of 8 months.
All over the country.
Yeah. We didn't get the Texas people and California people will attest. We didn't make it that far, but we made it down to like you know, the Atlantic coast and over to Kentucky and then up to Minnesota and then back around. So we've got like the top right corner of the United States, but we didn't make it down south and didn't make it to Texas. I made it up to them later, but you know, and so I started sitting down with these people in these interviews, and like I was working with these veteran filmmakers, and they're like, these people are articulate, like these people, you know, it's like people had never like heard people with 20 years, 30 years of recovery, you know, talking about these things, and I knew there was something special with these individuals, and so I was real blessed for Pat Taylor in pointing me in the right direction with a lot of people, and you know, one thing led to another, and I tried to do a little promo reel after I got my master's, the summer of 2012, I think, and you know, HBO said, no, that's not how we do addiction films, and you know, Showtime said, no, you know, no, thank you, you know. And so then I said, well, I got, you know, there's Recovery Month coming up, and we got to go to Detroit, we got to film this stuff, and we need a jib and all these things. And so I went on Kickstarter.
What's a jib?
Well, it's interesting. I'm so old now with just having my first film like 8 years ago. We don't even use jibs anymore. We use drones now. But a jib is this thing like a big arm that you used to, use and swing. So those camera shots in Detroit where we're over the crowd and you're coming this way, that's shot with a jib. So you can get these sweeping images of lots of people. Now you can just get incredible images with a drone, which is unbelievable, change in filming. But we would have had a lot more recovery walk footage and some other things with drones. So, but so I go on Kickstarter, and Jeff Riley, I said to him, who's an Emmy Award-winning editor, he's in Brantford, Guilford area of Connecticut, and I had worked with him in my first job in the film business, and he said, well, yeah, if you get it funded, I'll help you edit it. And I was like, okay, well, I got Jeff Riley, so that's good. And so he, and lo and behold, I started reaching out to people in the recovery community, and I called you, and I called other people. And people said, yeah, we'd support this. This looks compelling, which you've got here is compelling. Your pitch is compelling for the project, and we believe this could help us. And so lo and behold, we ended up. I think CCAR brought us over the top, but we ended up raising almost two times what I had budgeted we needed to raise to finish the film, and so Jeff, and then we got connected to other philanthropy and things like that. And Jeff, so we had budget to edit, to finish the film, and then we were able to release in the spring of 2013. And, I think the first time it hit me that we had something was in the edit room, in the winter of 2012, 2013 it's just that there's a feeling, there's a feeling, and you're kind of putting this together, and and there was a sense that there was something here, and that it was important, and so I just was really excited, and we finished the film, and we ended up doing a bunch of community screenings. A distributor picked us up.
We did one here at the Bushnell.
Yes, one of the first. I think this was like the first big one. Was the April of 2013. Yeah, and we did that at the Bushnell and those kind of venues, and that was like one of the coolest years of my life, where just going around the country in these community screens and.
You get so tired of seeing this movie though. After
well, yeah, I would sit in the wait. I wouldn't watch it anymore. But the coolest thing was to be able to take people through a journey and debate this thing around anonymity and bring people into these ideas and philosophies through the voices of you and Bill White and other people. Who might have never been able to access it in the medium that it had existed before that. So
there's some star power. Who were some of the stars in there?
We did, we had Kristen Johnston, who's actually gotten bigger now than she was at the time, because she was. But then we had Tara Connor, who was Miss America, had an incredible story. Chris Herron, certainly the former. Celtic was one of our closers. William Moyers, Bill Moyers' son, who's been a longtime advocate, was a part of it. But the stars, became the people doing the grassroots, recovery community work. From Marty Mann to Andre Johnson to John Shinholzer to Don Koyas, to those are the things that people left with in terms of that, and it's helped me kind of journey through becoming a little convener and thinking through it. I don't know that I would say that it did exactly what obviously
didn't it have a run on Netflix where was it the #1 documentary for a while?
We were on Netflix for 2 years as part of our distribution deal. It certainly was very popular. I will tell you that this film has been seen by, there's about 30 or 40 documentaries that premiere at Sundance every year. I'm sure that this film has been seen by more people than any other film that premiered at Sundance in 2013. It has, and the longevity of it. That's probably the most surprising. I never would have thought.
We still show it at our recovery community centers regularly.
Yeah. Well, it's like I couldn't imagine. So everything in life is about timing, and I just, it was the right timing to release something like that, and so a lot of people give me a lot of credit, but it really is the, Jeff Riley and then the people who we interviewed that moves people in that project. I'm really excited to have been able to do one on Texas, on Houston community. That was another Connecticut advocacy anger moment for me, where we didn't have any youth recovery programs at the time.
What's the name of that film?
Generation Bound. So we didn't have any youth recovery programs in Connecticut, and so I just, Houston called me up and said, hey, why don't you film our recovery-oriented system of care for adolescents? And so we were able to find some philanthropy down there that supported the film, and we got to make that. Jeff directed that one with me, and it was a good ride. And then now we've got another one coming out this fall that we're really excited, called Tipping the Pain Scale. So it's another story of kind of a more verite, on the ground story about how people are trying to affect change in communities on different layers.
Tipping the Pain Scale.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So getting to the underlying causes and conditions.
So are you a full-time filmmaker now?
I never
was.
I never was, and I am not still. I dedicate a good portion of my time to producing films today, more than I was before. I did a little stint in the nonprofit advocacy world for a while, and today I do a lot around health financing and other things like that. So I spend most of my time between creative projects for the recovery community and health financing stuff, trying to kind of work at two angles, because you need to open the hearts and the minds while you also make the rational, pragmatic, economic arguments.
I would agree with that.
And so one side kind of helps the other. So I try to work across those lines of interdisciplinary approaches to system change.
So what's family life like today?
Oh, tiring. Great. It's I have 3 little ones.
Wow. How old?
3. She just turned 3, my little one, Claire, and then I have a 5-year-old, Zachary, and an 8-year-old, Andrew, and an incredible wife, Michelle.
Is this the one you chased?
No.
Oh, where's about that up then?
No, it's okay. I met Michelle in Danbury Hospital. My recovery journey started there. My relationship with my wife started there. It was actually an incredible story. My grandmother was kind of put on hospice, and she said, I don't want to fight anymore. She was 87, and Michelle was her nurse.
Oh, wow.
And so it was my grandmother's last wishes that she put us together.
That you two get married.
Yeah, and so yes, it was and we've been just coming up on our 11th anniversary now.
Congratulations.
Awesome. Yeah, she's rode the wave with this filmmaker without a job for a long time. So
yeah, but you seem to make it work somehow, which is kind of a testament to what you're doing. So what is your work life like today? I mean, I know you're with, what company are you with?
So I'm a managing director at Third Horizon Strategies, and we're a small advisory firm that does a lot of social equity work, health equity work around vulnerable communities. We do a lot in kind of Medicaid policy, and we do other work. I manage this National Alliance for Addiction Payment Reform that gets us trying to get to value in addiction financing, both on the Medicaid side and on the commercial side. We also get to do, convenings, and we're working right now on organizing the recovery community around a federal proposal for a recovery support set-aside, which would kind of require all states to make a dedicated investment every year. Some states are doing some states are doing more, but it would kind of force people to make a dedicated investment in recovery support services.
You've assembled quite the advisory council. So all this travel in the world the United States making these films has really helps you make some connections. And when I just like to attend the meeting. I'm not so sure I like all the policy stuff, but you know that about me, and the financial stuff. But I do love the people you've assembled, and they're great minds, and what they're saying and contributing make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's so much wisdom. I mean, I think that's like when people really like if you put your finger on like why. There's a lot of films that have been made about addiction and recovery, like why is the anonymous people different? And the core thing is the wisdom of people with decades of recovery.
Seeing the recovery.
And very few projects have approached and asked people with decades of recovery, what does our system need?
And you promoted recovery in that film. Yeah. Like all your films, you're talking more about the program. You don't very rarely see the typical imagery of the pill bottle or the needle or the syringes, and you're talking about, and people, the title was perfect too, the anonymous people, because before the film, I think most people that saw it didn't realize how large the recovery community is. When you're talking about estimated 23 million Americans, that's a lot of people in recovery. Yeah, and we are hardly ever heard from if ever, as a collective, right? Mm-hmm. That's our goal. How do we rise, if you will, to use, Recovery Rising, Bill White's memoir kind of book, about how do we rise together? How do we all get in the same page? How do we have the same voice? Because so often we're fighting each other. And we have a common enemy, which is addiction. So why aren't we gathering our forces to address that and promote recovery as a solution? I'm not really invested in how people recover or who gets the credit. I just want people to recover. Recovery first. And I know you're about that too.
Yeah. We get stuck in the semantics and the small-mindedness of this way versus that way versus this economic interest versus that economic interest, and there's a much bigger message and there's a much bigger goal out there, and we have to stay very very dedicated and committed to that priority.
How has I just thinking about Sandy and her question about your family life, but how has recovery influenced your role as a husband and a father, and now as a son again?
I mean, it's probably the little things that people think of as what a good participant in a household looks like, but they're big things for me. Is being accountable, showing up, liking the person that I am. If I make a mistake, I'm able to apologize and try to do it. And certainly if able to see mistakes that we made with my older son, try not to learn from those mistakes and those kinds of things. So it's and it's about priorities, right? recovery personally for me early on was certainly about an ego deflation process, and parenting has taught me a whole nother level of ego deflation. Deflation. Yes, ego deflation. So yeah, it's been it's incredible, but
you have to be selfless as a parent. The kids force you to, they come first. I mean, and your needs come second. And Sandy and I have 2 in their 20s and 2 in their teens. I have a daughter who's in her 30s. And you've probably heard this from many people, but the only advice I would give you is enjoy each day, every moment, because when you're in it, you think, it goes by so fast. It just goes by so fast, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And I had the best advice from a former obstetrician we had, and he said he had 7 kids, so we knew what he was talking about. He said, these bad times when they're all acting out, like I could never get all the kids all in good behavior at the same time. He said, they will pass, but so will the good times. So make sure you're hanging on and being present for those.
I appreciate it.
And I think, too, what Sandy and I have discovered is, we don't have, our kids they're good people, and I think when you have 2 parents in recovery, 2 loving, nurturing parents, kids thrive. And how many times we've heard stories, too, and it's not always the case, well, parents were non-existent, or when the parents were good, and still, I don't have any beef against my parents. I still ended up addicted and alcoholic for other reasons, and certainly don't blame my parents. But they're still around. They're still a safety net in a lot of ways. And we can't underestimate that importance of, like Bill White and Don Coyes talks about, addiction and alcoholism being passed through like 7 generations, and that recovery blocks the transmission of the addiction, that we can change that script in a way that says our recovery can be passed along generations too. Yeah. And it's powerful stuff, because we broke the cycle, right? Break the cycle.
Yeah.
Tough thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you do look a little sleepy, so those kids are wearing you out, aren't they?
They are. Yeah, getting up early, and yeah, absolutely.
So is there anything else you want to talk about, or let me ask you a question though. If someone wanted to see the Anonymous people, how do they do it these days?
Or Generation Fan.
Yeah, I mean, if you got Amazon Prime, they're there.
Great.
Who
doesn't?
Yeah.
It's. I think they're up on a bunch of different platforms. So Google is the easiest, and certainly those are out there. And then we'll be announcing some information on how to see Tipping the Pain Scale soon. COVID has thrown some interesting logistics to film distribution.
Everything.
So not just so we're trying to figure out the best way to. Because I'm such a fan of community screenings and the power of bringing people together. And unfortunately, it's not so easy right now in this moment. So,
how many times do you think the Anonymous people has been viewed? Does it have like a clicker somewhere, like a YouTube thing, or you must have an estimate?
No, I really don't. I mean, the cool part is
more than 1 million times. Probably multiple millions, right?
Yeah, the best joke that I have about it with my wife is, I'm rehab famous. So
yeah, exactly.
I can walk through an airport, I can go anywhere in the world, and nobody recognizes me. But I was with my colleagues, and I walk into like an inner city treatment program in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, and this guy comes, were you in a movie? And I walk into, it's like invariably any treatment program or halfway house or a lot of jails, which is the exact right place for a film like that. So
Michael Askew gets that everywhere. He goes, like, people will quote him.
Yeah.
When hope is in the mix, anything is possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, I also, that's the other thing. It's cool. Like, I just voice the thing. I put a lot of other people on the face. So
Right.
I hope a lot of other people got to see it.
So
Yeah.
Michael is he's always getting, hey, I know
yeah,
you.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks for taking some
you.
time today. And anything else you want to add or share?
No, I'm just, really grateful to CCAR and to your leadership, for everything through the years and not just to the Connecticut community, but nationally and internationally, what this organization has done to advance the ideas of recovery support and peer recovery coaching. And so it's an honor and privilege to share this tax ID with you, this 6% sales tax here in Connecticut. So, but thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.